Hello, Chloe. So tell us your take.
Hello.
Hi.
So yeah, I'm a theist, and I wasn't a theist for a long time. What finally convinced me was ultimately experience itself. Having the experience changed me in a way that I cannot describe with words, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, you had a spiritual experience
The question,
specifically.
yeah, I had many spiritual experiences.
Okay. Okay, great. Go ahead.
And what I want to know is that as much as I remain skeptical, as much as I hold on to my skepticism and I treasure it, I have to look at those experiences and wonder, why are we wired for those experiences? Is this just a quirk of the, I am actually happy with the answer of, this is a quirk of evolution, deal with it. But the nature of those experiences, given how personal they are, given that they've answered personal questions about my life and answered, and really brought something to me, that's when I have to bring up the question, what's going on here? What's the deal? I don't think you're licensed to get the Seinfeld vase. So I won't go into the what's the deal. Never mind. But yeah, that's just what's your perspective on all of that.
Yeah. Do you want to start there, Dan? You look like you've got a thought.
I think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? I think about how we are beings that are capable of sensory experiences beyond our complete and total comprehension sometimes, and our need for explanation sometimes overrides our need for things to make logical sense. Like, I think we experience things before we fully logically understand them anyway, and so I think that kind of bias, it sometimes shapes our perspective, and I don't think that that's not always a healthy thing or a good thing. I think having a sense of life purpose and having a sense of place in the universe, is a great thing. As everybody who talks about it seems to think the world of it. At the same time, though, there are people that take advantage of that and abuse that, right? How many stories do we have to hear about people who felt so happy while they were in a cult, and then later, after the cult, they realized they were being abused, right? Obviously, that's an extreme example. But the fact is that that's a thing that happens with humans and seems to be unique with humans, right? Dogs don't really get into cults, or cats, as far as I'm aware. But you'll have to be seen. So yeah, I do think it's a quirk of evolution. I do think it's a quirk of just the human existence, our need to kind of fulfill ourselves. And sometimes we interpret our experiences in a spiritual way in order to do that. I don't think that necessarily lends credence to any particular ideology or way of thought process to be more correct than another in a religious sense. That being said, I haven't seen everything in the world. I haven't known everything. I haven't experienced everything. So I'm open to being wrong on that front. But when it comes to the contemporary spiritual experiences that most of us, particularly in the US, talk about, i.e. Christianity, right? Like, that seems to be pretty bunk for the most part. I can't speak to global spiritual phenomenon, though. Maybe some tribe somewhere has some access to some deity or some sort of transcendent being that I don't, but I've yet to see any clear evidence of that. So there you go. That's my take on that. What do you think, Sophia?
Yeah. So I think a couple things. One, we can easily start coming into sort of evolutionary psychology, which I think is a fun field, but there's not a lot that we can really say is evidentially backed in there. When we talk about, like, why do humans feel a particular way, we can theorize about how our brains developed. My take with this is that as a social species, we have to empathize with each other. Our survival was benefited by the fact that we were able to work together, that we were able to empathize and view things from a different person's point of view. That requires imagination. And so the way that I look at it is that imagination is, which I think that spiritual experiences can kind of be a component of, not that you're sitting there imagining on purpose, but that your brain is capable of presenting us with things we haven't experienced in the physical world. Imagination is a byproduct of the ability to work together and to be compassionate to each other. And so I think that that's the way that I conceptualize it. Like I said, I don't have specific evidence for this because that's a very murky area of science that's super interesting, but again, like doesn't provide a lot of really concrete, provable answers. I think it's more likely that that is the case, though, personally, than that we are endowed with godly visions. I think it's also, when I look at it, we tend to have the spiritual experiences that we are somewhat primed to have. They tend to be fairly culturally specific. And to me, that would potentially affirm the fact that this is part of an outgrowth of us being a social species, is that even our spiritual experiences tend to make sense to some degree with those around us, or to be similar to things that we've heard of happening before. I definitely don't want to speak for your personal experience, and I feel like I'm sounding a little bit like I'm doing that. And so that's how I would conceptualize a spiritual experience. I personally was religious for quite a while, and I didn't have as strong of spiritual experiences as some folks definitely report having, but I remember feeling everything that you're supposed to feel, you know? And I look at that now, and I was desiring of meaning, and I was finding it there at the time. I was primed for those experiences, and I was part of a group that I really wanted to be part of, and it developed that for me. So I think that quite a few spiritual experiences can also be explained that way, that we're opting into a part of ourselves that's open to that. Yeah. So all that to say, what do you think there, Chloe?
What I think is unfortunately nothing. I have no idea what to make of it from a lay perspective, because I don't know anything about neuroscience, and I don't know anything, you know, beyond what I've needed to get by with my mental health. But when I feel really, you know, through meditation and through prayer, and when I pray to my gods, I'm Norse pagan, and they tell me to go to therapy and take meds, like, how do I make sense of those experiences? Like, fundamentally.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like fundamentally, how do I trust my experiences is what I need to say.
That's a really interesting and kind of difficult question, because when we're talking about spirituality, we are saying, or when I'm talking about it here as it's a byproduct of evolution, I am fundamentally saying, I realize, don't fully trust your experiences. And I know that that's really tough and not the message that I necessarily want to give people, right? So how I would interpret that, and that's all I can tell, that's really all I can tell you here, is that there's a part of you that is giving you that information, that this is like, this belief in this instance is giving you information that I totally think is great, going to therapy and like seeking mental health solutions. But it's a way for you to maybe clarify what it is you're really needing in that moment. Again, I really don't want to come across as though I'm telling you what you need to believe about your own mental health in your own brain. But I think that's how I would think of it, is that, you know, thinking that your God's telling you that you need to do these things to be healthy is awesome. And is also, I think, something you maybe know deep down inside, and having it come from this external feeling voice, maybe validating and giving you the oomph to go forward with it. Again, though, I don't want to feel like I'm putting something on you here.
Yeah, I would add that you know, let's talk about experiences sans God or sans spirituality. Okay, if I have a week at work where I'm getting really down to myself and I'm telling myself, Dan, I screwed up at work this week. I'm doing a terrible job. I really don't think I'm doing all that great, and I'm letting my team down. That's a perspective I might have, but that might not be something like my coworkers might have, for example, right? Or somebody else might have. And like, you know, one could be true or one could not be true, but it's not healthy regardless, right? For me to have that perspective, even if I am making mistakes, even if there are things that I need to improve on, like that's not a healthy place for me to be at, right? So like sometimes your health is more important than whatever is like objectively true in that moment, right? So like in my experience, I would say, look, I would worry less about whether is there a God that's telling me I need to do this thing is happening versus I need to do this thing because this is what's best for me, right? So like that should be your most important thing, I think. Take care of yourself first, because think about this: if there is a God or gods, they probably want you to be healthy if they want to have a relationship with you, right? So it's a good thing to do regardless, right? And if there's not, well, you should still want to be healthy, right? Because you want to live and maximize life to your full potential. So I think that's how you should approach it first, is like, hey, let me get into a place where I can be okay to even talk about these kinds of questions, because that can be a really life upending thing, right? Figuring out, okay, I don't think this thing is real actually, or I do think this thing is real and I need to make some serious changes. So either way, like your health is probably the most important thing you should be looking at if that's how you're approaching this, right?
Mhm. Something I would throw in
Well,
there as
I
well.
mean, that's
Oh, sorry,
just
go ahead.
I just wanted to chime in that, the experience of, my God's telling me to make sure I take my meds and go to therapy is just an example.
Okay. Well, you got to understand, as when we hear that, we have to address that, right? Like we can't let that on the table. So, we want to make sure you're doing okay first. Yeah.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
Mhm.
But yeah, those kind of experiences where they just hold you in place and make you feel comfortable with yourself. Sorry if that doesn't make any sense, but those are the
No,
experiences that I've had.
it does. In the sense that I think we can relate to that feeling, that experience. There's a really interesting existentialist psychologist that you might enjoy, Irving Yalom, or Irvin Yalom, rather. And he was a big hand in at least amplifying existentialist therapy. And he himself did not believe in a God. And so he talked a lot about his own death anxiety, but he did talk about the fundamental need for meaning. Another big name in existentialist psychology is Viktor Frankl. They both focused quite a bit on meaning. And they didn't shy away from the fact that if they have someone that they're working with that is a person of faith, and that is entirely fine. There's no virtue to convincing someone, hey, actually, all of your experiences are wrong, provided, because meaning is just such a huge component of life. So even if you have existential therapy, it's focused on how you develop meaning in your life. And I think a fundamental component of that is also feeling comfortable with yourself, feeling that you deserve meaning and deserve to live a full life based on the meaning. Sorry, I can rant about this sort of thing for a long time, but I feel like moving aside from just a focus on being told to like take your meds and go to therapy, the question of meaning is big for most people. I wouldn't say all, because maybe there's exceptions, but I think that being comfortable with yourself, like that, to me sounds like it's fulfilling a fundamental need of yours that I also have. I just fulfill it a different way.
Yeah, and as a theist, I think that's totally valid, and I want to make sure that that's not a point of contention here.
Yeah. It's just part of how I would make sense of it for myself, looking at it from an atheist perspective.
So yeah, it's just, those are really the big questions that I had. I really don't have much else, not unless you've got questions for me as a theist.
I think my big question for you, and this doesn't necessarily have to be something you answer right now, I'd be curious what you wanted to be told about this, because it looks like it's something that you're working through and you're thinking about. And you called us, and I really appreciate your perspective. I appreciate your call. What is it you wanted to hear? And I don't know that you have a perfect answer for that, but I wonder if inside you there's something that's like looking for a particular answer, and I'd be curious as to what that is, even if it might be too personal to want to share on the air too. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. Yeah, it's just, if I go into a place where people agree with me on the whole nature of spiritual experience, what am I going to learn? What am I going to work towards? What space am I going to explore? So I just wanted to make sure that my understanding was correct, and make sure that I wasn't coming at this the wrong way. There really wasn't anything I was expecting or wanting. It was just, I don't know. Yeah, So
Yeah. Well, thank you for
anyway,
calling.
if anyone
You're
has nothing
interesting. I
else.
really appreciate that. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you for calling. I'm going to go
Yeah.
ahead and let you go.